If you think you've seen it all, wait until you hear what happened when a groundskeeper found a blind dog sitting beside a forgotten grave. What this man discovered next will shake you to your core. The morning fog hung thick over Willowbrook Cemetery, like a shroud of secrets waiting to be unveiled. The October air carried that sharp bite of approaching winter, and the ancient oak trees whispered stories only the dead could hear. But on this particular Tuesday, the silence would be broken by something that would change everything. Tom Henderson had been working these grounds for 15 years. He knew every headstone, every crack in the weathered paths, every shadow that danced between the monuments when the sun hit just right. But as he rounded the corner near the old section, the forgotten part where grass grew wild and headstones tilted like broken teeth, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, beneath the gnarled branches of a dying elm, sat a dog unlike any he'd ever seen in this place. The animal was motionless, positioned with an almost human-like reverence beside a small weathered headstone. What struck Tom immediately wasn't just the dog's presence, it was the way he sat. Still, perfectly positioned, as if he'd been carved from stone himself. The dog was medium-sized, with a coat that had once been golden, but now bore the dull patina of neglect and exposure. His ribs showed through matted fur, and Tom could count each one from 20 feet away. But it was the dog's eyes, or rather the cloudy, unseeing nature of them, that made Tom's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. Blind. The dog was completely blind. Tom approached slowly, his work boots crunching on the carpet of fallen leaves. The dog's ears twitched at the sound, but he didn't move, didn't even turn his head. He remained fixed on that headstone, as if it held the answers to every question that mattered. "Hey there, boy," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible above the morning breeze. Still, the dog didn't budge. It was as if he was in a trance, connected to something beyond the physical world around them. As Tom drew closer, he could see the headstone more clearly. It was very old, with edges worn smooth by decades of weather. The inscription was barely legible, covered in moss and age, but Tom could make out a few letters, M-R-Y, and below it, what looked like 1943. But it wasn't the headstone that made Tom's blood run cold. It was what he saw scattered around its base. Fresh flowers. Not the plastic kind that families sometimes left, but real ones. Wildflowers that had been carefully arranged, their petals still holding morning dew. Someone had been here. Recently, Tom looked around the deserted cemetery. No cars in the small parking lot. No other visitors in sight. He'd been the first one here this morning, just like every morning. So who had left these flowers? And more importantly, how long had this blind dog been sitting here? The dog's breathing was shallow but steady. His tongue hung out slightly, and Tom could see the pink of dehydration on his gums. This animal hadn't just wandered here. He'd been here for a while. Long enough to become weak. Long enough to become desperate. But still, he wouldn't move. Tom pulled his cell phone from his pocket and took a photo. Something about this scene felt important, like a moment that needed to be preserved. As the camera clicked, the dog's ear flicked again, but his vigil continued. "What are you guarding, boy?" Tom asked softly, kneeling beside the animal. Up close, he could see more details that broke his heart. The dog's paws were raw and cracked. His coat was matted with burrs and dried mud. Around his neck was a collar, old leather, cracked and faded, but still intact. Tom reached out slowly, careful not to startle the animal, and felt for a name tag. Nothing. The collar was bare, but as Tom's fingers traced the worn leather, he felt something else. Indentations, faint but unmistakable marks where letters had once been pressed into the material. The tag was gone, but the memory of it remained, carved into the leather itself. Tom squinted, trying to make out the faint impressions. The first letter looked like an M, or maybe an N. The others were too faded to read, but it was something. A clue to who this dog had belonged to, and maybe why he was here. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the fog and revealing more of the cemetery's hidden corners. Tom stood up, his knees creaking from the cold and the years, and looked again at the headstone. Something was different about it now. With the improved light and the fog cleared, he could see the inscription more clearly. Mary Elizabeth Carter, beloved wife and mother, 1916, 1943, Her love lives on in those she left behind. Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. 1943, that was over 80 years ago. Anyone who had known this Mary Carter would likely be gone themselves. So who was leaving flowers? And what connection could this blind dog possibly have to a grave from the 1940s? The dog shifted slightly, the first movement Tom had seen since arriving. His head tilted up, unseeing eyes seeming to look directly at Tom. For a moment, man and animal regarded each other in perfect silence. Then the dog did something that made Tom's heart skip a beat. He whimpered. Not a sound of pain or fear, but something deeper, something that sounded almost like recognition. Tom reached into his truck and pulled out the water bottle he always kept there. He poured some into his cupped hand and held it near the dog's muzzle. The animal's nostrils flared, and for the first time, he broke his vigil. His tongue lapped desperately at the water, and Tom could feel the desperate gratitude in each frantic gulp. "When's the last time you had a drink, boy?" Tom murmured, refilling his palm again and again until the dog had drunk his fill. "How long have you been sitting here?" But as Tom watched the dog settle back into his position beside the grave, he realized that the real questions were just beginning. Because in the distance, barely visible through the maze of headstones, he could see something that made his pulse quicken. Footprints, fresh ones, leading away from Mary Carter's grave and disappearing into the older section of the cemetery where few people ever ventured. Someone else had been here, recently, and they had left more than just flowers. They had left a mystery that would change everything Tom thought he knew about this quiet place of rest, a mystery that would reveal secrets buried deeper than any coffin, and a love story that had waited over 8 decades to be told. The blind dog lifted his head again, his milky eyes seeming to look past Tom toward those same footprints. His tail gave the faintest wag, as if he knew something was about to begin. Something that had been waiting far too long to unfold. Tom Henderson had seen a lot in his 15 years tending Willowbrook Cemetery, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to discover by following those mysterious footprints away from Mary Carter's grave. The blind dog seemed to sense Tom's intention before he fully formed it himself. As Tom stood and looked toward the trail of impressions in the soft earth, the dog rose on unsteady legs. For a moment, Tom thought the animal might collapse. His frame was so weak, his movements so careful, but there was a determination in the dog's posture that spoke of something beyond physical strength. "You want to show me something, don't you, boy?" Tom said softly. The dog took a tentative step away from the grave, then looked back over his shoulder. It was an unmistakable gesture. "Follow me." Tom had worked with enough animals over the years to recognize intelligence when he saw it. This wasn't just a lost, confused dog. This was an animal with purpose, a mission he'd been carrying out with the dedication of a soldier, even as his body failed him. The footprints led them deeper into the cemetery's oldest section, where headstones from the 1800s stood like ancient sentinels guarding secrets from another era. The path was barely visible, overgrown with brambles and fallen branches that Tom had to push aside as they walked. The dog navigated the obstacles with surprising grace, his other senses compensating for his lost sight in ways that amazed Tom. Every few yards, the dog would stop and lift his nose to the air, as if reading invisible messages written on the wind. His tail would wag slightly, and he'd adjust their course with subtle precision. They weren't just following footprints anymore, they were following a scent trail that only the dog could detect. After 10 minutes of careful navigation through the undergrowth, they emerged into a small clearing Tom had never seen before. It was hidden behind a thicket of overgrown yew trees, invisible from any of the main paths. In the center stood a small stone bench, weathered by decades but still solid. And there, scattered around the base of the bench, were more flowers, dozens of them. But these weren't just wildflowers. These were carefully arranged bouquets, each one placed with obvious love and attention. Roses, lilies, daisies, some fresh, others in various stages of decay, suggesting this had been going on for some time. A long time. Tom approached the bench cautiously, the dog staying close by his side. As he got closer, he could see that something was carved into the stone. Not professionally, but with the careful, loving hand of someone working with simple tools and infinite patience. "For my Mary, until we meet again, your devoted husband." Below the inscription was a date, started October 15, 1943. Tom's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone to photograph the carving. October 15, 1943. That was just months after Mary Carter's death. Someone had been coming here to this hidden spot for over 80 years, but that was impossible. No one could live that long. No one could maintain this kind of vigil for 8 decades. Unless the dog had wandered to the far side of the bench, where his nose was working overtime, sniffing at something Tom couldn't see. Tom walked around and found what had captured the animal's attention. A small wooden box, partially hidden beneath a pile of fallen leaves. The box was old but well maintained, its surface worn smooth by countless hands. Tom lifted it carefully, surprised by its weight. Something inside shifted with a soft rustling sound. "Should I open this, boy?" Tom asked the dog, who sat back on his haunches and tilted his head in what looked remarkably like a nod. The lid lifted easily, revealing contents that made Tom's breath catch in his throat. Letters, dozens of them, tied with faded ribbon and yellowed with age. Below the letters were photographs, black and white images of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Mary Carter. It had to be. But it was what lay beneath the photographs that made Tom sink onto the bench in shock. A leather dog collar, old and cracked, but unmistakably the twin to the one the blind dog wore around his neck, and this one still had its tag. Buddy, if found, return to Mary Carter, 1247 Elm Street. Tom looked at the blind dog, Buddy, who had somehow made his way to sit directly in front of him. The animal's cloudy eyes seemed to be looking right through him, into his soul. "Buddy," Tom whispered, and the dog's tail began to wag. Not just a little wag, but the full-body enthusiasm of a dog hearing his name spoken with love for the first time in who knows how long. But the mathematics were impossible. If this collar belonged to Mary Carter from 1943, then Buddy would have to be over 80 years old. Dogs didn't live that long. It was impossible. Unless this wasn't the original Buddy. Tom opened the first letter with trembling hands. The paper was fragile, threatening to crumble at his touch, but the ink was still legible. The handwriting was careful, elegant, the penmanship of someone who had learned to write when it was considered an art form. "My dearest Mary, it has been 1 month since you left me, and I still find myself setting 2 plates for dinner. Buddy misses you something fierce. He sits by your chair every evening, waiting for you to come home. I've tried to explain, but how do you tell a dog that the person he loved most in the world is never coming back? Your devoted husband, Frank." Tom felt tears prick his eyes. He looked at Buddy, who had somehow moved closer, his head now resting against Tom's leg. "Frank," Tom said aloud, and Buddy's ears perked up. "You knew Frank, didn't you, boy?" The next letter was dated 2 months later. "My darling Mary, I've found the perfect spot in the cemetery where I can sit and talk to you without the whole world watching. It's hidden behind the old yew trees where we used to walk when we were courting. Do you remember? You said it felt like a secret garden, a place just for us. I've started bringing Buddy with me. He seems to understand that you're nearby when we're there. He sits so still, so quiet. He's listening for your voice on the wind. All my love, Frank." The pattern became clear as Tom read letter after letter. Frank had been writing to his deceased wife for years, decades even. The dates jumped forward: 1945, 1950, 1960, 1975. The handwriting grew more shaky with age, but the love in the words never wavered. And in every letter, Frank mentioned Buddy. But as the years progressed, the references began to change subtly. 1963. "I had to say goodbye to our old Buddy last week. He lived a good long life, always faithful to your memory, but I found another golden retriever who looks just like him. I've named him Buddy too, because some names are too precious to retire." 1978. "Young Buddy is getting old now, Mary. He's earned his rest, but there's a pup at the shelter who could be his twin. I think you'd want me to keep the name going, keep the love going." 1995. "This new Buddy is something special, Mary. It's like he already knows about you. He was born understanding his purpose. He found your grave on his own the first day I brought him here. Sat right down beside your headstone. He'd been doing it his whole life." Tom's hands were shaking as he reached the final letters, dated just months ago. The handwriting was barely legible, clearly written by someone fighting against failing health and age. "My beloved Mary, I'm 98 years old now, and the doctor says my time is coming soon. I'm not afraid. I'm ready to see you again. But I worry about Buddy. This Buddy is special, Mary. He's blind, but he sees with his heart. He knows every step of the path to your grave, every turn through the cemetery. He's been my faithful companion for 12 years now, and he's carried on the tradition better than I ever could have hoped. I've made arrangements. There's money set aside for his care, and instructions for anyone who finds him after I'm gone. He belongs here, Mary. This is his purpose, his calling. He's the keeper of our love story now. Until we meet again, your Frank P.S. Tell him I said he's a good boy, the goodest boy. He'll understand. The letter was dated 3 weeks ago. Tom looked down at Buddy, who was watching him with those cloudy eyes that seemed to see everything that mattered. The dog's tail was wagging slowly, steadily, as if he knew his story was finally being understood. "Frank's gone, isn't he, boy?" Tom whispered. "And you've been keeping the vigil all by yourself." But as Tom sat in that hidden garden with a blind dog and a box full of love letters spanning 8 decades, he realized that Buddy wasn't alone. He never had been. Because love like this, love that transcends death, that passes from one generation to the next, that finds a way to continue even when the original lovers are gone, this kind of love creates its own form of companionship. Buddy had been carrying more than just his own purpose. He'd been carrying the love of Frank and Mary Carter, keeping it alive through sheer devotion and faith. And now, Tom realized with a clarity that surprised him, it was time for that love to find its way home. Tom Henderson sat in that hidden garden, holding Frank Carter's final letter. But it was what he found at the very bottom of the wooden box that changed everything he thought he understood about love, loyalty, and the power of promises kept across generations. Beneath all the letters and photographs lay a manila envelope, thick and official-looking. Inside, Tom discovered documents that revealed the true scope of Frank Carter's devotion and the extraordinary lengths he had gone to ensure that his love story would never truly end. The first document was a will, dated just 6 months ago. Frank had left detailed instructions for the care of Buddy, including a trust fund that would provide for the dog's needs for the rest of his natural life. But it was the second document that made Tom's heart race, a deed to a small property adjacent to the cemetery, 1247 Elm Street, the address from Buddy's collar. According to the paperwork, Frank had purchased the property in 1945, 2 years after Mary's death. It was a modest house, nothing fancy, but the deed revealed something extraordinary. Frank had legally designated it as a sanctuary for golden retrievers named Buddy, in perpetuity, generation after generation of dogs, all carrying the same name, all trained to carry out the same sacred mission. Tom's hands trembled as he read the accompanying letter, addressed to whoever finds my Buddy. If you're reading this, it means I'm finally with my Mary again, and my faithful friend needs someone to understand his purpose. This Buddy is the 7th in an unbroken line of dogs who have kept vigil at my wife's grave. Each one has been chosen carefully, trained lovingly, and given the most important job in the world, to be the physical embodiment of love that never dies. Buddy knows the way to Mary's grave by heart and by scent. He knows the secret path to our hidden garden, where I've spent 80 years writing her letters. He knows that every morning at sunrise he should sit beside her headstone for exactly 1 hour, keeping her company in the way I no longer can. But most importantly, Buddy knows that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice we make every day, even after death separates us from those we cherish most. The house on Elm Street is his. The trust will provide for his food, veterinary care, and any companions he might need. There's a caretaker who comes by daily, or did until recently. I fear she may have passed as well. And there are instructions in the house for his care. But Buddy doesn't need management. He needs understanding. He needs someone who recognizes that what he does isn't obsession or confusion. It's the purest form of love this world has ever seen. If you can provide that understanding, if you can help him continue his mission while ensuring he's healthy and cared for, then you've been chosen for something beautiful. Because Buddy doesn't just honor the dead, he keeps love alive for the living. Look for the signs. Look for the others who come to visit Mary's grave. You'll understand when you see them. With gratitude and hope, Frank Carter. Tom looked at Buddy, who had been watching him read with that uncanny intensity blind dogs often display. Others? Tom asked aloud. "What others, boy?" As if in answer to his question, Buddy's head turned sharply toward the cemetery's main entrance. His ears perked up, his nose twitched, and his tail began to wag with an excitement Tom hadn't seen before. In the distance, Tom could hear the soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel path. Someone was coming. Tom quickly gathered the letters and documents, his mind racing. Frank had mentioned signs, others who came to visit Mary's grave. As the footsteps grew closer, Tom felt Buddy tense beside him, not with fear or aggression, but with anticipation. Through the trees, Tom could see figures approaching Mary's headstone. An elderly woman with silver hair, moving slowly but with purpose. Behind her, a middle-aged man carrying fresh flowers. And behind him, something that made Tom's breath catch in his throat. Another golden retriever. Tom watched in amazement as the trio reached Mary's grave. The elderly woman knelt beside the headstone and began to speak in soft tones Tom couldn't quite hear. The man arranged the flowers with obvious care and reverence, but it was the golden retriever that captivated Tom's attention. The dog, also clearly elderly, with a graying muzzle and careful movements, walked directly to the exact spot where Buddy had been sitting earlier. He settled into position with the same reverent posture, the same absolute stillness that had first caught Tom's attention hours ago. Buddy was trembling with excitement now, making small whining sounds deep in his throat. He wanted to go to them. He wanted to join what was clearly some kind of regular gathering. "They know about you, don't they, boy?" Tom whispered. "They've been part of this all along." Tom made a decision. Gathering the box of letters and supporting Buddy's weak frame, he began to make their way back through the hidden path toward Mary's grave. As they emerged from the trees, the elderly woman looked up and saw them approaching, her face lit up with relief and joy. "Buddy!" she called out, and the blind dog's tail went into overdrive. "Oh, thank goodness! We've been so worried about you." The woman stood carefully and approached them, her eyes taking in Buddy's condition with obvious concern. "I'm Eleanor," she said to Tom, extending a weathered hand. "Eleanor Patterson, and this is my son David, and our Buddy. We call him Buddy too to avoid confusion." Tom introduced himself and explained how he'd found the blind dog that morning. As he spoke, Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Frank passed 3 weeks ago," she said softly. "We've been coming every day hoping to find Buddy, hoping he was all right. Frank made us promise we'd look after him if anything happened." "You knew Frank?" Tom asked. David stepped forward, still holding the fresh flowers. "Frank was our neighbor for 40 years. My mother used to help him care for the Buddies when she was younger. It became a family tradition." Eleanor nodded, her hand gently stroking Buddy's head. "Frank's first Buddy saved my life when I was 7 years old. I was playing too close to the creek behind our houses, fell in during spring flood. That dog jumped in and pulled me out. Frank said Mary sent Buddy to save me, that she was watching over all the neighborhood children. After that," David continued, "my family felt connected to Frank and Mary's story. When Frank got older and needed help training the new Buddies, my mother volunteered. It became our honor to be part of keeping their love alive." Tom felt pieces clicking into place. "There are others, aren't there? Other families who help?" Eleanor smiled. "Oh yes, the Hendersons on Oak Street. Their grandfather was Frank's best friend. The Rodriguez family who runs the flower shop downtown. They've been donating flowers for decades. The veterinarian who cares for the Buddies never charges. Her grandmother was Mary's friend before the war." "It's not just Frank and Mary's love story," David added. "It's the whole community's love story. Everyone who's been touched by their devotion, who's chosen to help keep it alive. Buddy here isn't just Frank's dog. He's all of ours." Tom looked down at the blind dog, who was now surrounded by people who loved him, being sniffed and approved by his fellow golden retriever. For the first time since Tom had found him, Buddy looked truly at peace. But Eleanor's next words revealed that this moment of reunion was just the beginning of something even more extraordinary. "Tom," she said, her voice gentle but serious, "there's something else you need to know, something Frank probably didn't have time to explain in his letters. Buddy's not just the keeper of Frank and Mary's love story." She paused, looking around the cemetery at the dozens of headstones visible from where they stood. "He's the keeper of all their stories. Every person buried here, every love that's been lost, every promise that needs keeping. Somehow each Buddy has been able to sense when someone needs comfort, when a grave has been forgotten, when love needs tending. David nodded. We've seen it happen. Buddy will disappear for hours, and we'll find him sitting beside some lonely headstone where no one has visited in years. The next day, someone will show up, a distant relative who suddenly felt called to visit, a friend who had a dream, a stranger who felt drawn to pay their respects. Eleanor's eyes were bright with unshed tears. It's like Buddy carries a piece of every love story in this place, like Frank and Mary's devotion opened up some kind of channel between the living and the dead, and Buddy is the guardian of that connection. Tom felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the October air. He looked at Buddy, who seemed to be watching him with those cloudy eyes that saw so much more than sight could reveal. "What happens now?" Tom asked. Eleanor smiled, and for the first time since this extraordinary morning began, Tom saw hope mixed with the sadness in her expression. "Now," she said, "we take Buddy home. We help him heal, and we learn what it really means to be part of a love story that never ends." But as they prepared to leave Mary's grave, Buddy did something that surprised them all. He walked over to Tom and sat down directly in front of him, just as he had done hours earlier in the hidden garden. His tail wagged once, twice, and then he placed his paw gently on Tom's boot. Eleanor gasped. "He's chosen you," she whispered. "Tom, Buddy's chosen you to be part of this, to help carry on the tradition." Tom looked down at the blind dog who had somehow seen into his heart and found him worthy of the most important job in the world, keeper of love that transcends death itself. And in that moment, Tom realized that his quiet life as a cemetery groundskeeper was about to become something extraordinary. What happened next would test everything Tom Henderson thought he knew about the boundaries between life and death, between human and animal devotion, and between the possible and the miraculous. Eleanor Patterson's words echoed in Tom's mind as they made their way to her car. "Buddy's chosen you." But it wasn't until they reached the small house at 1247 Elm Street that Tom began to understand what that choice truly meant. The house was a modest two-bedroom cottage, painted white with blue trim, surrounded by a garden that had clearly been tended with love for decades. As Eleanor unlocked the front door, Buddy moved past them all with purpose, navigating the unfamiliar space with the confidence of an animal returning home. "He's never been in this house," Eleanor said softly, watching Buddy walk straight to a dog bed positioned perfectly to catch the morning sunlight through the front window. "Frank always met us at the cemetery. But look at him. It's like he's lived here his whole life." Tom watched in amazement as Buddy settled into the bed with a deep sigh of contentment. For the first time since Tom had found him, the dog looked truly relaxed. Not just resting, but at peace. David was exploring the kitchen, opening cabinets and examining the contents. "Frank left everything ready," he called out. "There's enough dog food here to last months, medication schedules written out on the refrigerator, even a first aid kit specifically for golden retrievers." But it was Eleanor who discovered the room that made them all fall silent with wonder. "Tom," she called from the hallway, her voice filled with awe. "You need to see this." Tom followed her voice to what had once been the second bedroom. Now it was something else entirely, a shrine to love that took his breath away. The walls were covered with photographs spanning 8 decades. Frank and Mary's wedding picture held the place of honor above a small writing desk, but surrounding it were hundreds of other images. Pictures of each Buddy through the years, posed beside Mary's headstone or playing in the cemetery grounds. Photos of the various families who had helped care for them, children growing into adults, adults aging into elderly caregivers, all connected by their shared devotion to keeping Frank and Mary's love alive. But it was the writing desk that drew Tom's attention. It was here that Frank had written all those letters, and the surface was worn smooth by decades of use. On it sat the final letter Frank had written, not to Mary this time, but to the person who would find and care for Buddy after Frank was gone. Tom picked up the envelope with trembling hands. His name was written on it, in Frank's shaky handwriting. "Tom Henderson," Eleanor read over his shoulder. "But how could Frank have known your name? How could he have known you'd be the one to find Buddy?" Tom opened the envelope and read aloud, "Dear Tom, if you're reading this, then everything has happened exactly as it was meant to. You found Buddy when he needed you most, and more importantly, you chose to help him rather than simply calling animal control or walking away. That choice tells me everything I need to know about your character. I've been watching you work in the cemetery for years, Tom. I've seen how carefully you tend each grave, how you straighten flowers that have blown over, how you clear weeds from headstones that no one visits anymore. I've seen you pause at children's graves, and I've watched you work extra hard to make the veterans section perfect for Memorial Day. You think you're just doing a job, but you're doing something much more important. You're tending love. You're maintaining the physical connections between the living and the dead. You're exactly the kind of person who can understand what Buddy represents. Tom's hands were shaking now. He had never seen Frank around the cemetery, never spoken to him. Yet somehow, this man had known him, had watched him, had understood something about Tom that he barely understood about himself. The letter continued. Buddy will teach you things you never knew you needed to learn. About loyalty that transcends understanding. About love that refuses to accept the finality of death. But more than that, Buddy will show you that you've been chosen for something extraordinary. The work you do in that cemetery isn't just maintenance, it's ministry. You're not just keeping the grounds, you're keeping faith. The house is yours now, Tom, if you'll accept it. Not to own, but to steward. To provide a base of operations for the most important job in the world, helping love find ways to continue beyond the grave. There's a room upstairs you haven't seen yet. Go there when you're ready. Buddy will show you the way. With hope and faith in your good heart, Frank Carter. Tom looked around the room at Eleanor and David, who were watching him with expressions of amazement, at Buddy, who had somehow found his way from the living room to sit beside Tom's chair. Upstairs, Tom said softly. He said there's something upstairs. They climbed the narrow staircase together, Buddy leading the way with surprising confidence for a blind dog in an unfamiliar house. At the top of the stairs was a single door, closed but not locked. Tom turned the handle and stepped into a room that defied explanation. It was an office, clearly, with filing cabinets and a large desk, but covering every available wall space were maps of the cemetery, detailed beyond anything Tom had ever seen. Each grave was marked not just with a name and date, but with notes about the person buried there, about their family members, about when they had last been visited. Eleanor approached one of the maps, her finger tracing the careful notations. Look at this, she whispered. Frank documented everything. Every person in that cemetery, every story, every connection. Tom examined the desk more closely. In the center was a large ledger book, open to a page dated just 1 week ago. Frank's handwriting filled the margins. Mrs. Henderson, Section C, Plot 47. No visitors in 3 months. Husband James may not know she's been moved here from the VA cemetery. Buddy showed unusual interest in this grave on Tuesday walk. Sarah Chen, Section B, Plot 23. Young mother, died in car accident 2019. Parents visit monthly, but grandparents in China never came. Buddy sits here sometimes when he thinks no one is watching. William Buck Morrison, Section F, Plot 12. Boo veteran, no known family. Buddy found American flag blown away from grave last week, carried it back in his mouth. Page after page of similar entries filled the ledger. Frank hadn't just been tending Mary's memory. He'd been tending the memory of everyone in that cemetery, using Buddy's mysterious intuition to guide him to graves that needed attention, love that needed tending. This is incredible, David said, examining another wall map. Frank created a complete database of need. Every lonely grave, every forgotten story, every love that was at risk of being lost to time. Tom sank into the chair at the desk, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Frank had been doing and what he was apparently being asked to continue. I'm just a groundskeeper, he said quietly. I don't know anything about this kind of work. Buddy approached Tom's chair and rested his head on Tom's lap. The dog's cloudy eyes seemed to be looking directly into Tom's soul, and for a moment, Tom could have sworn he felt something pass between them. An understanding, a recognition, a calling. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Tom's shoulder. None of us knew anything about this kind of work when we started, she said softly. But Frank saw something in each of us. The same thing he saw in you. What's that? Tom asked. A heart that understands that love doesn't end just because life does, David answered, and the willingness to do something about it. Tom looked down at Buddy, whose tail was wagging softly against his leg. The dog's presence was somehow calming, as if he was sharing some of his deep peace and certainty. "What would I need to do?" Tom asked quietly. Eleanor smiled. "You're already doing most of it. The difference is now you'll be doing it with purpose, with guidance. Buddy will show you which graves need attention, which stories need preserving. And we'll all help you learn what Frank spent 80 years perfecting." Over the next hour, they went through Frank's system together. The filing cabinets contained detailed records of every person buried in Willowbrook Cemetery, dating back to 1943. Some files were thick with correspondence from family members, newspaper clippings about the deceased, even photographs of memorial services. Others were heartbreakingly thin, just a name, date, and a note. No known family. But in every file, no matter how sparse, there was evidence of Frank's attention. A pressed flower from their grave site, a note about the weather on the anniversary of their death, a small sketch of their headstone. Frank had made sure that no one was truly forgotten. "This is why Buddy chose you, Tom," Eleanor said as they examined the records. "You already treat every grave like it matters." Frank saw that. He saw someone who understood that this isn't just a job, it's a sacred trust. As the afternoon wore on, Tom found himself making a decision that surprised him, not just to help, but to fully embrace what Frank had started, to become not just Buddy's caretaker, but his partner in the most important work Tom had ever been offered. "I'll do it," he said finally. "I'll take care of Buddy, and I'll continue Frank's work." Buddy's tail wagged harder, and the dog did something extraordinary. He stood up, walked to the desk drawer and began pawing at it insistently. "What is it, boy?" Tom asked, opening the drawer Buddy was indicating. Inside was a small wooden box, similar to the one they'd found in the cemetery, but newer. Inside the box was a collar, leather, well-made, with a brass nameplate that made Tom's eyes water. "Buddy and Tom, Keepers of Love's Promise, 2025. Frank had made it in advance, somehow knowing this moment would come. 3 months later, Tom Henderson's life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. The small cottage on Elm Street had become his home shared with Buddy, who had regained his strength and vitality under Tom's careful care. But more than that, it had become the headquarters for something beautiful and unprecedented. What Frank had started as a private devotion between husband and wife had evolved into something much larger, a community-wide effort to ensure that no love story buried in Willowbrook Cemetery was ever truly lost. Tom had learned to read Buddy's subtle cues, the way his ears would perk when walking past certain graves, the way he would slow his pace or change direction entirely when approaching headstones that needed attention. Together, they had reunited dozens of families with forgotten burial sites, organized memorial services for veterans who had died alone, and even helped solve historical mysteries about the cemetery's earliest residents. But it was on a cold December morning that Tom truly understood the miraculous nature of what they were doing. He and Buddy were making their routine early morning walk through the cemetery when Buddy suddenly stopped at a grave Tom had never paid particular attention to before. The headstone read, "James Morrison, 1925 to 2023. A recent burial, but one that had received no visitors since the funeral 3 months ago." Buddy sat down in his familiar vigil position and refused to move. Tom checked Frank's records and found a thin file. James Morrison, widower, one son believed to live out of state, no contact information available. Following the protocol Frank had established, Tom began researching. It took 2 weeks of phone calls and internet searches, but eventually he located James Morrison's son in Oregon, a man named Michael, who had been estranged from his father for over a decade. "I didn't even know he had died," Michael said through tears during their phone conversation. "We had a fight years ago about something stupid, and we were both too proud to make the first move toward reconciliation. I always thought there would be more time." Michael flew in for a private memorial service that Tom organized. As he knelt beside his father's grave, placing flowers and speaking words of love and forgiveness that had come 11 years too late, Buddy sat beside him with that same patient, understanding presence he had shown Tom that first morning. "How did you know?" Michael asked Tom afterward. "How did you know my father needed someone to care about his grave?" Tom looked down at Buddy, whose cloudy eyes seemed to hold wisdom accumulated across generations of devoted service. "I didn't know," Tom said honestly, "but he did. Somehow he always knows." As winter gave way to spring, the network of families helping to maintain Frank and Mary's mission continued to grow. Eleanor Patterson had organized a volunteer schedule to help with research and record-keeping. David had created a website documenting the cemetery's history and the stories Frank had preserved. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about the cemetery angels, volunteers who helped maintain forgotten graves and reunite families with their heritage. But through it all, Buddy remained the heart of the operation. His mysterious ability to sense which graves needed attention had not only helped countless families reconnect with their history, but had given the entire community a new understanding of what it meant to honor the dead and preserve love across generations. On a warm morning in May, exactly 1 year after Frank Carter's death, Tom and Buddy made their way to Mary's grave for their daily vigil. The headstone was surrounded by fresh flowers, not just from Frank's old network of supporters, but from dozens of families who had been helped by Buddy's ministry over the past months. As they approached the grave, Tom noticed something different. Buddy wasn't walking toward his usual spot beside Mary's headstone. Instead, he was heading toward the hidden garden where Frank had written all those letters. Tom followed, curious about the change in routine. When they reached the small stone bench, Tom found a surprise waiting for them. A new plaque had been installed, placed there sometime during the night. In memory of Frank Carter, devoted husband, community servant, and proof that love never truly dies. His legacy lives on in all who choose to keep love's promises. Below the inscription was an addition that made Tom's throat tight with emotion. And in memory of all the Buddy's faithful guardians of the heart's devotion, love is the bridge between two hearts, and these good boys keep that bridge strong. Tom sat on the bench, and Buddy settled beside him with a contentment that spoke of a job well done, a mission fulfilled, a promise kept across decades and generations. As the morning sun climbed higher, painting the cemetery in golden light, Tom pulled out a letter he had written, the first entry in what he knew would become his own decades-long correspondence with the keepers of this sacred trust. "Dear Frank and Mary," he began, writing in the careful handwriting he had developed over the months of record-keeping. "1 year later, and your love story is still changing lives. Buddy and I wanted you to know that the promise is being kept. No love will be forgotten. No grave will go untended. No story will be lost to time." As Tom wrote, Buddy's head lifted, his unseeing eyes turning toward Mary's distant headstone. His tail began to wag slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm, as if he could sense something the human world couldn't perceive. And perhaps he could. Because in that moment, as morning light streamed through the ancient trees and the wind carried the scent of fresh flowers from dozens of well-tended graves, it felt as if Frank and Mary Carter were there with them, approving of the legacy they had created, the love they had kept alive, the bridge between worlds that they had built one faithful day at a time. Buddy's tail was wagging so hard now that his entire body was wiggling with joy. He looked up at Tom with those cloudy eyes that saw everything important, and in that look was a message as clear as spoken words: "Well done. The love continues. The promise is kept." That night, the dog didn't just save a life. He saved hope. He saved the belief that love transcends everything: time, death, even the limitations of human understanding. And in doing so, he proved that sometimes the most profound faith comes not from those who can see, but from those who choose to believe in what their hearts tell them is true. In a world that often forgets the power of devotion, Buddy and Tom had become living proof that some promises are too important to break, some love too precious to let die, and some hearts too faithful to ever truly say goodbye. The vigil continues. The love endures, and somewhere in the space between this world and the next, Frank and Mary Carter smile, knowing that their greatest wish has been fulfilled. Their love story will never end.